So today I will be talking about using React with Inertia.js, how it can make front-end development faster. So I'll be doing a general overview of what Inertia.js is, as well as how it can kind of speed up front-end development, the kind of perks of using Inertia.js, so why you would want to use Inertia.js, as well as kind of new features that were included in Inertia.js version 2, which got out of beta earlier this year, I believe. Okay, so first, you're probably all wondering, who am I? And if you're not, I'm sorry, but you're about to find out anyway. My name is Leah Thompson. I am a front-end engineer at Laravel. So I am a front-end engineer on the DevRel team, but I'm mainly doing marketing sites, landing pages, or other tools for DevRel, and then some like other more typical DevRel things like speaking at conferences like I am here today. My other About Me stuff, I kind of made them more Florida coded since we are here in Miami. So I am a Florida native. I was born and raised in Florida. We got there eventually. I lived in Florida for 26 years before moving to Colorado. Normally, whenever I tell people I live in Colorado now, they ask why I wanted to move to Colorado when it's so different from Florida. I hate heat and humidity, so it probably makes a lot of sense now why I did not like living in Florida, but it is really nice being in Miami now and being close to the ocean again, because I do miss that, but I love the mountains in Colorado. I'm also a University of Florida alumni. Go Gators. So I graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics from the University of Florida. And then a fun fact about me, which Madison kind of said, is I am a former educator. So after college, I ended up working as a high school geometry teacher for 2 years before I quit to kind of pivot into tech. Yeah, for people who pivot. So I said that with no enthusiasm. I'm so sorry. But today, sadly, I will not be teaching you all geometry today. I'm sure everyone's devastated. Instead, I'll be teaching you about using React with Inertia.js and how that can speed up front-end development. Which brings us to the big question I feel like some, if not all of you, like the majority of you probably have. What even is Inertia.js? So just like to see a raise of hands. Raise your hand if you do not know what Inertia.js is. Okay, so a good amount, which is good because this talk focuses on it. So if you already all knew, it'd be a little bit boring. So let's just get into what Inertia.js is. So Inertia.js is a library that bridges your front and back end together. So you can think of it as the bridge between your front end and back end. You can think of it as the glue that holds your front end and back end together. It does that by allowing you to write a monolith. So you're able to write a monolith, and it gets rid of the need for a separate API layer. So it reduces the complexity as well as boilerplate code, which you'll probably hear me say boilerplate a million times in this talk. I am very sorry about that. But it just makes it where instead of needing a separate front end and back end, which is probably what you would think you would need if you wanted to build a React front end to be used with a back end that is using a back end framework such as Laravel or Ruby on Rails. But this allows you to use those frameworks and write a monolith, so you don't need the separate API layer. Instead, you can just return the component through your back end controller and then send whatever back end data you want to it to be used as a prop on the front end. So it's worth noting that Inertia.js itself is fine-tuned for Laravel, which Laravel is a full-stack framework for PHP. But there are community adapters for Inertia.js, so it can be used with other back-end frameworks as well. So Inertia.js, the package itself, is maintained by Laravel and fine-tuned for Laravel. But the community adapters are created by people in these other backend framework communities, so they are community maintained. There are adapters for Ruby on Rails, Django, Flask, Golang, I think Elixir and more of them, so the rest of them would be listed on the InertiaJS website and in the documentation. The main idea behind InertiaJS is that it allows you to use the backend framework of your choice, so like Laravel, Ruby on Rails, and leverage the things you enjoy about it, so the authentication or controllers, etc., but then also use it with a JavaScript front end, which we're going to focus on React because we're at React Miami, but it is also compatible with Vue and Svelte as well. And then let's talk about now how this can speed up front-end development. So I already kind of talked about how it takes away the need for the separate API layer, which makes it where you don't have to do Axios and fetch requests to get your data. But let's kind of show off what I mean by that. So I'm also sorry that class is cut off in this, and all you see are the S's, and it almost looks explicit. I apologize. But this is basically the backend code that you would use to render your component. So this is Laravel code that you're seeing. Like I said, you can use it with other backend frameworks. I work at Laravel. I like using Laravel, so for the purpose of this, I just am using an example that is Laravel. So we have a user controller here. We have a method, which is show, and it's being passed in a user object. Inside of that, we are returning an inertia render. Inside of our render function, we have two parameters, or two arguments we're passing in. Let me drink water real quick. So the first one is a string, which is user/show, and this string represents the name of your component. So this is the name of the component that you want to be rendered. You don't have to put the extension name, so no like .tsx, just the component name. And then your second parameter is an array. So this array, you're going to put inside of it all of the data that you want to be passed to the component as a prop, basically. So for this example in here, we're just passing one property, which is a user. The value of that is the user object that we are being passed in through the show method. And so that property is now going to be available on the front end to be used as a prop, which you can see here. Also, sorry, there's like white spaces there. So these examples are also just straight from the Inertia docs. So this would generally be the component that you just rendered in the previous example. So we would want it to have the same name. So just pretend this is also show user and not welcome. But here we have user is a prop. So we have user as a prop on this component because we just passed in user here in our array for the second parameter. So now it is a prop. And if we look in the return function here, under our layout and our p tags, our paragraph, we now have hello, and then in curly braces, user.name. So we're able to just right away have the data for user and just like display properties from it. So we're not having to do any Axios calls or fetch requests or anything like that. We just have it. So it's pretty clean, pretty simple, which removes the need for, I bet you guessed it because I've said it 50 times, but Axios requests. So here's just kind of like a boilerplate of what kind of that call would look like. So here we just have a use effect with an empty dependency array. Inside of it, I have a Axios request, so we have axios.get. Inside of that would be our URL for our API endpoint to get data for a specific user. Then we have a response, and we're setting some state in our component to be equal to the response.data, and then we're setting some other state for loading. You have our catch block where we're getting the error, we're console erroring, and then we're setting the state for loading again to false. This isn't a lot of code, right? But just think if you're doing this multiple times, so you need data from your backend, and they're two separate things, and you're having to make Axios calls multiple times, this can add up, right? So if you're doing Inertia.js and you don't have this boilerplate code and you just get rid of it and pass everything in and use them as props, it'll just make it cleaner, easier to work with. So at this point, I basically only scratched the surface of Inertia. There are a bunch of other perks of using Inertia as well, which you might be thinking, how have you only scratched the surface when you've been yapping for so long already? It happens. There's a lot to talk about with Inertia. So there's also forms. I feel like forms are made more simple with using Inertia.js. Forms are something that are extremely important for applications, which I'm sure all of you here agree with, and everyone here has used forms before. Well, yeah, in programs. So Inertia.js just makes it easier to work with forms. It is possible to make classic HTML form requests using Inertia.js. It's not really recommended because it would cause a full page reload. So instead, it's better to intercept from the form submissions and then make requests using Inertia instead. And then to make it easier to do that, Inertia.js has a form helper. So the form helper is useForm. My size are in all caps, but of course that wouldn't be in all caps. It'd be lowercase and only the F would be capitalized. But useForm is the form helper here, which makes it easier to handle. It makes it simpler to write forms because it handles form state and submissions in JavaScript by providing reactive form data. It also does automatic error handling and status tracking, like processing was successful and recently successful. It works seamlessly with server-side data validation responses, and it binds errors directly to their form fields, which makes form handling in Inertia apps feel more like a traditional SPA while still leveraging server-side controllers. Okay, and then this is an example of like what the code would look like for using useForm in React. Which, one second, I'll walk through it. Okay, so up here we have const, or destructured object. So we have data, set data, post, processing, and error. So we're getting all of these from useForm, so from the Inertia.js form helper. Data here is what's going to store our form data. Set data is going to update that. So every time you use set data, then our data, which is storing the form data, will be updated. Then you have post, which does the post request, processing, and errors. And then inside of the use form, here we are initializing our data for the form. So we're initializing email, which is an empty string, password, which is an empty string, and then remember, which is a Boolean that we're initializing to be false. So those would be on data. So you'd have data of email, data of password, and data of remember. Under that, we have our submit function. So there we have e.prevent_default, which will just prevent form submission on default form submission. And then we're doing a post request to our login endpoint. Which Inertia.js handles the rest. So it handles CSRF, redirects, even flashing validation errors. And I kind of talked about it, but in the return function down here, sorry, some stuff is cut off, but in the onChange functions, you can see where we're using set data to update the form data as people are, as users are putting in their information in the input fields. Also, errors up top, error handling is built in with Inertia.js. So you don't really have to do the form validation on the front end, so in React here. Instead, you would do your post request. It would send the data to your backend controller, which for the sake of this, I'm going to use Laravel as an example. So it would send it to your Laravel controller. Your Laravel would then respond with any errors if there were any. and Inertia would automatically inject them in your component. So then you would be able to access them through the errors up top. So you don't have to do any weird catch blocks, or you don't have to do any special Axios error handlers or anything like that. It's just automatic. But so that's very nice. There are other perks as well. So besides the form helpers, there are other features just in Inertia themselves that it offers. So Inertia enables a method to make shared data available with every request, and also maintains server-side rendering to offer cohesion with SEO-friendly pages, but while offering the same kind of speed as with single-page applications. Kind of like I talked about with forms, Inertia also intercepts requests with link clicks as well. So it does it with forms and link clicks. So that keeps it where the component needed is only updated instead of doing a full page reload as well, which makes it feel like a single page application without the kind of boilerplate that you would have with an SPA. There's also built-in support for showing loading bars on page transitions. You get history navigation, scroll restoration, and more straight out of the box with Inertia. So those were kind of the features with just Inertia. Earlier this year, InertiaJS version 2 came out of beta, so I'll talk a little bit about new features with version 2. Which one thing with V2 is the InertiaJS library was completely rewritten to architecturally support asynchronous request. So it now supports, as well as asynchronous requests, it also supports polling, prefetching, deferred props, infinite scrolling, and lazy loading, and then more. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these. I don't know if I'll be able to touch on all of them. But for the asynchronous request, it now allows multiple requests to kind of happen simultaneously without backing up, without blocking each other. So this means you can perform background data updates or form submissions without interrupting the user's experience. And then also the reload method is now async by default. So it provides a more fluid user experience as well, because like I just said, you can now do background data submissions or form submissions without it blocking anything. It also introduces polling, and with polling, it introduces a kind of helper for it. So it introduces a new use poll helper, and what that does is you can set up automatic or manual polling to refresh data at specified intervals, ensuring your application stays up to date without requiring user input. And this is ideal for, of course, applications that would be like real-time chat applications or live dashboards and stuff like that. And then I think everything else I won't go into, just to leave time in case there are any questions. Are there any questions right off the bat? No questions? Okay. I hope you all learned about InertiaJS. Hopefully you're interested in building something with it, using whatever backend framework of your choice. Of course, I would prefer Laravel, but go out and use whatever makes you happy. I would love if you do go out and build something using InertiaJS, that you post about it and you tag me to let me know how you like it. And thank you.